Well, welcome to the latest video. Okay, so reassembly of these types of reels. I'll just go through it very quickly with a couple of them. Generally keep the parts in separate little labelled pots so that you know which is which, because often you've got several on the go, you know. Now then, these I very rarely take these out because they're quite difficult to get out, and if they're not broken there's no real need to. It's easy to clean round them with a brush anyway, so it's not a particular problem. Okay, so the ratchet pawl gets inserted by putting it flat onto the surface, and then if I use another ratchet pawl from another reel just to show you, it essentially goes over the post there, and you just depress the spring with your finger and slide it on, and essentially it only goes one way around. You'll find that if you put it the wrong way around, the reel won't click in both directions because it won't be right. So it only goes one particular way around because the angle is only set for one particular direction. So make sure you keep a note of that. So what we do next then is we put the base washer on, which is what we were talking about earlier on, if you remember. And then you're going to oil. You put a little bit of oil on the string there. You don't need a lot. You need some on the ratchet pawl, and you need a reasonable amount on the reel bearing. Okay, so before your drum goes on, you need to put some reel grease on it. This is blue because it's aluminium based reel grease. It's made by Penn, and it is specially formulated for fishing reels, so it is actually not advisable to use car grease. Simply don't advise you to do that. So you then put your biz on there, and you can see how it's clicking nicely in both directions. And then you can see also how that's become flush with the surface because I've put the base washer in there. So now you have the screw and the little washer which stops it coming off the axle. If you've got all the correct parts, there should be the right amount of clearance for you to tighten this up firmly. It doesn't need to be very tight, but you can see how the screw doesn't move but the reel body does. Okay, so that's one of them done, and we need to put the reel foot on. Okay, so putting the reel foot on, which is relatively easy. You do need to nip the reel foot a little harder than you usually would, because obviously it's a critical part. You don't want it coming off. Okay, so I haven't shown all of that necessarily because I'm sure you're going to work out how to screw on a reel foot. So you give them a little bit more of a nip, but obviously don't overdo it because it is quite soft metal, so just be careful. And that's your reel assembled and ready to go. I need to get some line onto it, and that's our old Cogs Popular with its brass Centrepin. Okay, the other reel I was going to show you the assembly of is this is the Edgar Sealy, which we looked at earlier on, which has the steel bearing, and it's going to go together in pretty much the same way. As you can see there, we've got the springs been left in there because they're reasonably difficult to remove, and you don't necessarily need to do so. So I'll just show you quickly how that is done. You basically hold back the spring there and waggle the pawl. It's called a pawl, this piece, P-A-W-L. If you see it at a funny angle like that, then you've done it wrong. So obviously I did that for the camera. yeah. And right, so there you go. You can now see it's pretty straight, and you just do a quick check. You put it on like that, and it should nicely click in both directions. So then you've done it right. Okay, so the Edgar Sealy reel now has a base washer installed. The next thing to do then is to pretty much do what we did with the other reel, which is put a bit of oil on the clicker there, and a tiny bit of oil on the spring, and quite a lot of oil on the bearing, And I'll keep it in focus there in the camera. Now this area here needs to have a bit of grease on it. Okay, so the Centrepin's been polished up, so it's a nice sort of brassy colour, and the centre screw anyway is chrome, so that goes back together. So it just remains to put the foot onto the reel. This just needs to be firm, doesn't need to be really tight. There's enough clearance there to make the thing work. Okay, and that's your nicely conditioned Edgar Sealy reel, which is beautiful for resale now. Superb. Okay, so next I'm just going to demonstrate how to put together one of these slater latches. You see the little screw head there? So you put your ratchet in, and you want this piece here, which is pretty obvious, I think. You ratchet in now. That piece there goes that way up onto the spring, and you're going to move that so it's positioned over that hole, and then you want to put your finger on it. Okay, so screw that down, and there's a specific screw that goes into that, which you can see there. Now then, you need to make sure that the spring goes on the back side of the post, not the front side, okay, otherwise it won't work properly. So your ratchet pawl, again, you want to insert this, and it needs to look straight. If it looks like it's at a funny angle, then it probably won't work. And the way to check it, of course, is just to put your drum back on. Check it clicks in both directions. Right, so that's ready. So what we need to do next is just set up the slater latch. So, you see, this type of reel does not have a base washer like the previous generation of reels, which I showed you first. So it has a slater latch, and it has an adjustment screw, and it's the adjustment screw which is in the top of this, just there, that actually holds the reel drum off the back plate. So you have to get this adjusted correctly. Okay, so what I've done here is I've screwed the slater latch cap on its own, and I've just got the drum sitting on the base plate. And that's where it is. There are no parts inside there. So take one of these. At the bottom here there's a depth gauge. Okay, so set that on there and measure the depth from the top surface down to that cap. Right, so I get, if you look at that, 4mm. So next you take the grub screw, and these are actually bronze, but if you want to buy a replacement, they are M3.5, and you can get a brass M3.5 and you can modify it. So what you want to do is measure the length of the grub screw, so that comes out 4mm. What that means is that when the grub screw is just sitting at exactly the surface of this, there is no adjustment on this reel. So you want to put it in and then give it a quarter of a turn. Half a turn might be too much, but about a quarter of a turn to 3/4 of a turn, and that should set up your reel properly. These are the parts that you need. You need the lever, this with a grub screw on it, which we just described how to set up, 2 screws for either side. These are M2.5 if you need to get replacements. Sometimes you have to file the heads a little bit to fit in the slot, but that's what they are anyway. If you're in America, by the way, M is metric 2.5. A brief description of this. This needs to be flat, except the very tip, which has a little upturn, so you can get your fingernail over it. Okay, so that's how it should look when it's assembled. You got your lever sitting here onto the pin there, and your spring comes around and avoids the screw. That's why it's got a funny shape on it. You can now put the cap on. So if you try to avoid knocking this lever while you're putting the cap on, that should keep it all in place while you screw it down. So now we've got a nice lever that works. You see your drum doesn't come off, and then this is designed so that you push towards the handle and then it lifts off like that. See, it's got a nice bit of spring on it. And you do see these springs, people make them out of copper and all kinds of things. What you want is 0.8 to 0.9mm spring wire to make the springs with. They're pretty easy to make, to be honest. You just need a pair of rounded silversmith pliers. So what we're going to do now is just adjust this to be a quarter of a turn more than just below that surface, so that this is off the back of the drum. So as you screw it down, you can feel it biting, and you should also know that that's pretty flush now, which is where we said. So you give that an extra quarter turn and it should be exactly right. So play with it a bit and adjust it. If it feels a bit stiff, back it off, and it should be nice and free like that. So it should remain now for the insides anyway, just to oil this and put some grease on the cogs. So now that that's done, you got real grease on there, and there's oil on the mechanism, and it is much smoother now. Oh, that's beautiful. So we'll put the real foot screws on. Now, if I didn't mention before, the real foot screws are M3.5 if you need to get replacements. You sometimes have to file the heads a little bit, but okay, so there's a finished reel. You can see it's beautiful, slick. Slater latch comes off, goes back on again. Beautiful. Nicely finished off. Give the real foot screws a little bit of a nip, but don't go too hard because it's quite soft metal. And here we have the old Cox Gilmore with a base bearing screw in there, all ready for sale. Beautiful. So what I'm going to do next is go over the another type of young Slater latch. This is actually a Young's reel, this one. This is a Pride X. We'll go over the assembly of this. Okay, reassembly of the Pride X. Right, you can see the two little screw holes there. You can actually also see where the spring went. The spring goes on the back side of the post. Okay, so I guess you probably know that already, but just in case you didn't, it's also sometimes difficult to see whether it is behind the post. These little parts here, they go into the top of the spring there, and then you've got a little screw which goes on the back side and screws through. Okay, so you can see those are installed now, and the wee screws go in the back plate. One of the great advantages of the JW reels is that they are recyclable. They're easily separatable into all the different metals, which is a good thing because they do break eventually. Okay, so the ratchet poles, one of them goes in so that it's not set. This is so you can have a right-handed or left-handed reel. Pull the spring back with your finger and then spin it around, and it should sit ready to go. So we have a similar procedure. You make sure that the drum is sitting on the base plate, and then we measure the distance down here using this. So this comes out at 4mm, and this little slug comes out at just over 4mm. So that gives you an idea of how to adjust it. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how to assemble this Slater latch, because there are two different types of JW Young Slater latches. There are actually several different types of cap you can get on the top, but there's one type which has a very flat surface here, and that's the one I just showed you on the old Cox reel. In actual fact, it's not flat, it has a slight rim. But the other type is this type, and this is where, if you notice the parts on the old Cox reel that were on the drum surface, well, the drum surface in this type of reel is flat, and the Slater latch mechanism with a hinge pin is actually on the cap instead, but it goes together in the same way. So I'll just show you that assembled. Okay, so that's assembled. This needs to be flat with a very slight uptick at the end so you can get your fingernail underneath it. Essentially the only difference between the two different Slater latches is that it is possible to position this one in the wrong place, so that it would go that way instead of, because when you got your finger on it you need to lever against this handle here to pull the catch towards you, so you need to just make sure you rotate it so it's in the right place. So there we have it on, and the spring should stay in place when you turn it upside down, as long as you don't touch the handle. But that's the same instruction as for the other type. Don't touch the handle while you're assembling it, otherwise it will come away. So there you go, that's quite a stiff. I used 0.8mm wire for this, so it's quite a stiff one. So there we have it. Now that's a big 4-inch, so that's quite a big reel. So the next thing to do is just put some oil and grease on it, as we did with the last one. Grease the cog and oil the other parts, and then we'll put the reel foot on. So there we have our finished 4-inch Pridex. Now runs all smooth, and now it's got a bit of oil and grease on it. And that is a fully recycled reel. It's a prime example of recycling, and it'll probably go on for another 50 years, you know, because they're so well built, these reels, which is one of the reasons why I do them. Superb. Anyway, if you fancy a 4-inch Pridex, have a look at our site. Thanks so much for watching, folks. Bye.